Welcome, everybody. My name is Jamie Steve. I work with the Tamarack Institute. You're here for a webinar today called Kim Samuel on Belonging, Finding Connection in the Age of Isolation. Before we get started, we're just going to just take a moment of gratitude and acknowledgement. I'm joining from the traditional territory of the Neutral Anishinaabe and Haudenosaunee peoples, colonially known as Waterloo, Ontario. And I'm sharing this just to make sure that as we're having these conversations about neighborhood and belonging, we make sure we remind ourselves that everybody belongs and that we are guests on the territories that we occupy. And we are so thankful for the stewards of the land who have made us feel like we belong in our communities here. And just for us to be better, better neighbors in the territories where we live. And with that, I am going to hand the mic to my colleague, Heather Keam.
Thank you, Jamie. Welcome, everybody, to today's webinar on belonging. My name is Heather Keam, and I'm the Associate Director for the Deepening Community Practice area here at the Tamarack Institute. Kim and I have stoked our fires. We put the logs on our fires, and we're really getting ready for a great fireside chat. Today's chat is a passion of mine. I struggled with a sense of belonging and connecting growing up, going off from school to school and university, moving from town to town. I went to a different country for a year, and I had to really work hard and join clubs and groups and meetings and work hard at creating this sense of belonging for myself. And I'm happy to say that I now have that sense of belonging in my community. I am so happy. I love my community. I love doing work and volunteering and seeing my community being such an amazing community. And that sense of belonging has really just made me happy. In 2019, the Angus Reid did a survey, and it said that people felt disconnected and lonely. And then we had 2.5 years of COVID. And the research post-COVID is saying that we are lonelier and more disconnected than ever. And it's affecting our health and our communities. The Deepening Community team, we're on a mission to support communities, cities, and towns to build, plan, and instill belonging in every neighborhood. Everyone has the right to belong. We are so excited to have Kim Samuel join us today, author and founder of the Samuel Center for Social Connectedness. And today we're having a fireside chat about her new book on belonging, finding connection in the age of isolation. Kim Samuel is an activist, educator, and movement builder. She's the founder of the Samuel Center for Social Connectedness, an academic lecturer in institutions including Oxford, Harvard, and McGill universities, and most importantly, an author. Kim has had been recently named visiting scholar at the Oxford Poverty and Human Development Initiative, University of Oxford, and the first ever Fulbright Canada Ambassador for Diversity and Social Connectedness. Welcome, Kim.
Hi, Heather. I'm really happy to be here. We've planned this for quite a while, and now today's the day. And I'm having a little fireplace envy, but I tried my best. Great to be here.
Now that we're toasty warm and we have our cup of tea, I just want to start off with, I gave what belonging meant to me in my introduction. And so I just wanted to start off the chat with, what does belonging mean to you?
Yeah, I really appreciated you sharing at the beginning, and I'll begin the same way. I certainly haven't always felt belonging in my life, and yet I've kind of reached this point where I figure that I know what it means to me, and it's this feeling, and it is a feeling as well as a right, but the feeling begins with being at home within ourselves, being at home within our community, whether that's where we live or a virtual community like today, although I don't know many other organizations than Tamarack that could create the feeling of home in a virtual way, but you do. It's an experience that's both subjective and also personal. Someone can feel belonging alone in a room, and someone else could feel completely isolated, surrounded by all kinds of people. I started out on this over 20 years ago, and it was really about wanting to call out social isolation and destigmatize it, and help to obliterate it. But I, over the years, got to see that belonging was the root of that tree, and on that tree is, for me, I guess we could say 4 branches going along with the idea of a tree, and it's people, which is mostly what we think about, but it's also our sense of place and our sense of rootedness in community, which I know Tamarack is all about, and it's also a sense of power. And this, again, for me, is really what's within yourself, but it's also having agency and voice and governance over the systems that not only you encounter, but that sometimes govern you. And finally, purpose, which is having a sense of purpose in one's life. For me, that's really been, I guess, always people, but if I had to pick one that gets me through, it's having a sense of purpose. So even on a rainy day, in many different ways, I'm lifted up by that. But in the end, feeling of home. That's how I would describe it.
And so I don't know if anyone has seen, I'm going to try to put the book up. Oops, I can't see that. The book, I've got
Just
lots
don't
of
put it in the fire. Don't put it in the fire.
No, don't. I've
would
got
be so
lots of
sad.
tabs in here. And for those of you on the call today and, working in community, at Deepening Community, we believe that belonging is the cornerstone to our communities. And that just as you said, Kim, about that sense of voice and power and purpose and place, if you can create that sense of belonging, you can, make your communities more equitable and inclusive, the economics of your community, because you're going to contribute the civic engagement of your community. And so, belonging really is the cornerstone of our community.
I can't hear you. Sorry.
Kim, I was just saying about belonging being the cornerstone of community. And I felt in your book that you really talk about belonging and community. And I just wanted to know, why did you feel the need to write a book?
Well, it was more of a quest than a need, but many times I wasn't sure I needed to be doing this at all, because it was quite a long, hard, and isolating process. But it was about really wanting to be able to share a lot of amazing stories about people that had overcome some pretty major challenges, and not only found their belonging, but also have been able to help a lot of others along the way. I spent about 2 decades learning about how we can combat isolation and to build its antithesis, which is belonging. And I suppose if I could bring it down to 2 examples as to why I thought, I want to try to write a book, and then ask that you bear in mind that then I started writing the book about 20 years later. So the two moments were one in 1997, a long time ago, when my late father, Ernie Samuel, had a very severe brain injury out of the blue, and he was in a coma for 3 months, from which he awoke very slowly. And when he awoke, he had a lot of disabilities, and I got to be aware of isolation, but also ageism at the same time. He had just turned 65, and because of that age, he was denied rehabilitation unless that unless our family could pay for that, which is very rare that a family could pay for that. And the reason that he was denied rehabilitation was because he had reached his 65th birthday, which meant for insurance purposes that he was of less value. He was in his sundown years. And yet there was a lot of money to pay for to put him to a long-term care facility, a nursing home, where he would have had no help of regaining his independence. So it started with me as an issue of that's an injustice. And how often does that injustice happen to people based on any number of reasons, including their birthday? That's to me a denial of rights. The other thing is that I kept seeing that the better he got in terms of regaining the functions to a certain extent, as best as he could do, functions that he had lost, that battle, that was the one that he got up every day, and he was learning to speak, and he was learning to do a lot of things again. That wasn't the problem. That was the challenge that he was driving at. The problem was the way so many people were treating him, as if he was lesser than, a term I use a lot and see a lot, lesser than because of what had happened to him. And I got aware that he was aware of it too, and it made him very sad. And people were isolating from him, which of course was very isolating for him. So that was the first point that I'd really seen isolation in a way that I had my eyes all the way open. And I still see it every day when I wake up. It's a figure sitting alone at the bottom of a well, outside of all circles of concern. No one cares for, and so on and so on. And it's not that was my dad. That is what seeing that represented. And although he had a family, very loving family, and he did get rehabilitation, we were blessed to be able to do that, and friends, and it's still, he didn't feel like that a lot of the time. He felt so many changes, and that he was being turned into something less in people's eyes. And I can't imagine anything more painful than that. So that was my call to action, if you will. And then a couple of years after my father passed, which was in 2000, I got to meet Nelson Mandela. And when I met him, it was a wonderful moment. It was also, I guess, what you call a light bulb moment or something like that, where he said to me, when I asked about isolation, of course, you would know all about isolation. And he said, no, I have never been isolated, which shocked me. Not even in Robben Island, I said. He'd been imprisoned, as all of you will know, for 27 years, and 19 of those in solitary. And he said, no, I was never isolated. We were all brothers working together with a common purpose. I was never alone. And he then went on to describe a child with HIV/AIDS in a village that no one would love or care for or feed. And he said, I have seen isolation, and it is very bad. And so I really believe, Heather, that's when something in me decided one day I'm going to write a book about all this. But it actually took me another 17 years to figure that I'd learned enough about the field and the subject to write a book, and to feel confident enough to write a book. But that's, I guess, that's where the seeds were planted.
And the book is full of stories, and I love it because stories, I don't know, it can relay a message better than just words or data or stats. And so there are several stories in there, and one of them was about addiction, and that one had really stuck with me, and we'll get to that, but
Okay.
down the way. So just keeping on about what is belonging.
Yeah.
We're a society that is more connected than ever. And so, through your research and, pulling in the stories, why do you think belonging is getting worse, or disconnection and loneliness is getting worse?
Yeah. You see, for me, that's not so much of a paradox anymore. How can it be when we're more connected and we have cities, many of us live in cities, with millions of people. How can it be that we could feel lonely or feel isolated? And I want to say that I'm pretty sure that some of the people that have joined us today, and even perhaps you and I, know exactly how that can be. And I turn more in a good way. I would say there's a lot more recognition about loneliness and isolation as not only being real, but also as having so many negative effects on people's physical health, as well as in every other way. And I'm hoping with that comes some destigmatization, because stigma always seems to make people suffer more and make dialogue harder. But I would also say that the why this isn't a paradox for me is that we're seeing so many more systemic failures of actual systems, and we can go into history on that one and look at I think one of the worst isms of colonialism, and how I'm asked a lot, well, what if someone lives in a community and the community is really tight knit? Isn't that great? Nobody's lonely. Well, first of all, I'm not so sure that would be the case. But if a community of people or a nation of people who live within Canada don't have access to the structures and the systems that affect them in order to lead in those, then I call that isolation, and I call that a lack of agency and a lack of choice. Loneliness, oddly enough, it's a pretty new phenomenon in the broad context of human history. We didn't really see that by any name until about 400 years ago, when people are moving around, and people living alone more. And just this past weekend, I think it was one of the weekend days anyway, in the Wall Street Journal, there was a really powerful article about how many younger adults and older adults are living alone, and what a struggle that is. So I want to come back to the fact that we are often living autonomous and lonely lives, and to address that, and not, in my view, to address that as, oh, well, this should be addressed in the context of mental ill health, or this has to be diagnosed, or it's how you feel. And so I'm not qualified to give anyone a diagnosis of anything. But even if I were, I wouldn't even try to do that. This is an experience that we have. And in terms of it getting worse, I think it already is really bad, and I don't think it has to get a lot worse. And I think it's connected to just about anything you look at in terms of how access to services is done, or how we look, for example, at global warming, and we see within any given city that the area over and over again that's going to be most affected by global warming is the area that already is disadvantaged, doesn't have the green space, doesn't have the parks, the library may not be fixed up. And so I go back a lot to a term by Toni Morrison. I don't know if she coined it, but she coined it for me, which is othering. And that is the act of making someone not different from you, but less than you. And I think as long as othering is pervasive, which I believe it is, and as long as people are feeling more uprooted, which I believe they are, we're going to see a lot more acting out, because we know we know it's a need. I believe that it is a birthright. And so even if you acknowledge it's a need, then if you don't get it satisfied in one area, you'll go get it somewhere else.
Yeah. And I also see, so we're more connected than ever, which is more through technology, right? My husband's Australian, and he's really connected to his parents via Zoom or the internet. And so it's a very superficial connection. And I also have seen over the time is how we build our communities. So you just talked about the bumping places, those places where we get together and we naturally have a conversation. And in my town, our post office just redid their beautiful foyer area where all the post boxes are, to this small little thing that you can't stay in there to have chats with your people and with your neighbors and the people in the communities. And so how we build our communities has also contributed to this like loneliness and sense of connection. And the othering was an interesting part of the book because I've never really heard that term before. And it reminded me of a quote from John McKnight from Asset-Based Community Development. And he said, when you label somebody, you make them invisible. And I love that quote, right? And so like that was my connection there. So I know we're dwelling on some of the lacking in our communities. I just want to talk about this chapter you have around the shadow side of belonging, and Rex's story.
Yeah. Well, the shadow side of belonging is what I envision as what happens with that, what I just mentioned, that need to belong. We are social animals, right? We hear that all the time. And what happens if your belonging is denied? Now, I say we have a birthright to it. But if you feel like it's being denied, something's happening. And I gave the exam, Rex Molefe, who I gave his story. He's in South Africa, and Rex was a child soldier when he was younger in a few different places, and he conveyed to me that he felt, although this wasn't any kind of life for any child anywhere, he had a sense of he was belonging to something. He was belonging to a group, and that basically said that you matter here, you have a family here, and so on. And Rex actually, I should add, I know this wasn't exactly on your question, but Rex is, oh, it kind of is, but Rex is in a real inspiration, because not only that he survived and overcame some incredible challenges, but Rex has given his whole life to helping other young people who, for one reason or another, and I'm going to use system in quotation marks because I think there's a lot of systems that aren't so good anyway, but not being part of, in this case, any kind of good circle or good system that's nurturing them and that sees them for who they are and does not label them. And I maybe give one more example on the shadow side, if that's all right, is recruitment for violent extremism. Why is it that that young people are recruited who we could say, well, they don't know what they're getting into. Okay, but they'll have people on, whether it's on a call like this, or basically know how to speak to a 15-year-old in the language of 15-year-old, and say, well, you really belong with us, and you're wonderful, and you're brilliant, and why don't your parents understand, treat you like an adult, and all of this. Now, that kind of language coming at a young person, I would say, doesn't ordinarily make them go off to be recruited, but I would say that they're given something about adventure and something about this and a higher purpose. And if you don't feel that you belong, and I don't mean just what we went through as adolescents and and at different points in life. I know I'm older than you, so I'm in a different point, but life is a journey. We know this, but when there's certain years when you're younger that are just so hard, when people asked me what it was like, what it's like being on a book tour, and I'm not including today because today is totally wonderful, but being interviewed and so on, what I say is, hey, do you remember your first day in high school? What was that like for you? And because I felt that I was getting my first day in high school a lot. But the thing is, even in my first day in high school, which wasn't so good, I knew that I was really supported, and not only at home, but also in the community. So if you look at young people who, because of their faith, their culture, don't feel that they fit in or are othered by the wider group, I think that really can fracture things at home. And I really put that chapter, I decided to call it the shadow side, not the dark side, because I didn't want this to be about, oh, this is light and this is dark. What I wanted to show is that we all need to belong, and that if we're not reaching out to people even actively on a daily basis, not even knowing who doesn't feel like they fit in, then you don't really know what's happening under the surface. And sometimes that can have consequences that are really bad, not only for that individual, but for others too.
Yeah, and there's a quote I just want to say from that part, and it says, "The mayhem and social ills that we are confronted with today in the world actually stem from that of lacking a sense of belonging." And that just, I highlighted it, I underlined it, and as Deepening Community, we're thinking about our next 5-10 years and where we're going, and the fact that we said belonging is the cornerstone of community, that quote just really validated that we're on the right track. And it is really important that we all need to, we're all of us on the call, and all levels of government and organizations and people need to create that sense of belonging. And
I obviously agree. To me, this is a bit of a challenge I'm going to put out, and also know that Tamarack is already rising to this challenge. But I really feel, and I do also say in the book, I feel that we don't belong unless we all belong together. And the other part of that is that if there's a community, to me, isn't the word belonging and community don't go together unless intentionally belonging is a cornerstone of community.
Yeah. I'm actually going to turn to those on the call with us, because I'd like to pose a question to the participants. As we're talking, we're talking about our communities and lack of connection. I would love for you to put in the chat box, what do you think needs to happen to build a sense of belonging in our future? And if you could do that now, I'd love to read those and see about pulling them in as we go forth. And I also want to remind you that I'm looking at the question and answer box right now, and I don't have any questions in the Q&A box. So just reminding you that this isn't all about Kim and I. We would love to hear questions from you. And so please put them in there. Because I only have one last question, and then I'm going to pass it over to the participants. And my question to you is, so we've talked about the community, the 4 dimensions of belonging, the shadow side of belonging. So let's go to the future and hope and possibilities. And you in the book say every person, by simple virtue of the fact that they're born, has the right to belong. And this right to belonging is a system problem, not a demand problem. And that really got me thinking too. And so how do we build a future of belonging? I'm going to pull up these are in chat. I have to tell it, this is multitasking at its best, trying to do the 3 different screens.
I'm really happy to be a guest today. I know it's hard to manage.
So Kim, your book is full of inspiring stories, and so what do you think in terms of the stories that you've heard and the possibilities of a future of belonging in our communities?
Well, someone that just, I guess I'm not seeing all the chats, but some of them, someone said about that we need to listen more. And I although I'm doing a lot of talking right now, don't go by that. We really need to listen more, and not just kind of listen at each other, but deeply listen to one another. And the other side of labeling people is to invite people to show up in the community as they are. When someone tells you who they are, believe them and honor them and respect them for that. And hopefully have the same in return, because all of this is reciprocal. But another thing that maybe isn't so obvious and wasn't really so obvious to me, frankly, until I went out talking about my book, is that, and you see it in the book with all the stories, that there are a lot of people doing this work already, and organizations, and of course Tamarack. But you and Tamarack have a real awareness of it, right? It's part of your mission, and it's the belonging is in there. Maybe I don't know the language of your mission, but it's right in there, and it's an active call to action. So I wondered why it is that I said I'm kind of feeling like the cheering squad, which I don't mind that, but to say, hey, do you know, I really appreciate what you're saying, but you know that you guys are doing this. And so why is it that they don't know that? Well, I think, and maybe this could be, maybe we'll bring a question or two forward as well, but because I haven't really asked about this before, but does anyone think that it's possibly that it isn't valued in society enough, the same way that caregiving isn't valued enough? And there I refer to, and I do talk about caregiving as being reciprocal, that we know how important caregiving is, and yet whether you're a family caregiver or a caregiver to a friend and so on through personal relationships, or you're in one of a number of what I think of as calling professions. I mean, arguably all professions could be seen that way depending on one's attitude to work. But I think especially, for example, about nursing, and I think about teaching. Those come to mind right away. Do we honor people in those professions enough? I mean, why are teachers having to go on strike to have their wages, have treatment that they want, and so on, or nurses too? Like that isn't what they want to be doing. And that's I have a lot of friends who are both teachers and nurses, so I get to talk to people a lot. I mean, that's not the goal. Become a teacher and then walk a picket line. Oh, what fun! No, not fun. Or to be a caregiver, a family caregiver. I write about a fictional couple in the book, and spoiler alert, they're based on my mom and dad. Lionel and June were my parents' middle names, and it's not exactly their story, but there's a bit of it in there, which is, and I'll give you my mom and dad story. Ernie and Liza, they were that they after my father passed on, a lot of people came to my mom and were asking her, Liza, her name was Elizabeth, people called her Liza, are you going to stay in the house? And she was so shocked by that question. And what she got out of it is because Ernie was gone, would she stay in the house? And I thought, gosh, if my mom had passed first, I really doubt that my dad would have been asked if he could manage the house. And it's just, and people came in a lot right after my dad died. Should say our dad. I had a brother and sister. Now I have a brother. Sister's passed on, but we were really pretty stunned at all this. So many people then, and a few days after the funeral, a lot of food starts arriving. My mother didn't really have an issue providing for her own food needs, but she sure did want to get out a bit. And most people just faded away, and they say, let us know if there's anything we can do. What would you like? If you need anything, tell us. Well, that's not a relationship. So I talk about caregiving, and I see supporting belonging for ourselves and others really as an extension of that philosophy of care. It is reciprocal, and it is really important. This isn't just the nice stuff. And if we want to know how important it is, then we can just ask ourselves, what it was like being isolated at home during COVID, and understand what that felt like. And some people, of course, are like that all the time. Anyway, sorry to go on about it. It's just, I'm quite passionate on this subject.
No, and I love it. I absolutely love it. So we are now getting a bunch of questions in and some phenomenal comments in the chat box. And so some of the solutions that people are talking about, listening more, I love it, right? Local and I was gonna I'm like thinking of scale, right? So that neighborhood in that block, and you can have a sense of belonging in there, and the bigger the place you are. Like I'm looking at my sense of belonging in elementary school versus my sense of belonging in university. Right? It's very, very different, right? So scale is important in belonging. A great one was about children, and instilling the values of inclusion and reciprocity, and in our children as they grow up. And so those are some of the comments in the chat box. But there is a question here, a couple questions I'd like to talk about. And we kind of brushed over it, but Angie asks about the systematic failures and belonging. Can we talk more about the system?
Sure. And I thank you, Angie. I wish we had 4 hours for that one, because it's systems. And so, I mean, there are clearly heinous systems, including or beginning with colonization and slavery, which still exists to this day. And we still see shackling around the world of people who have, in particular, psychosocial disabilities. To enslave another, to me, to talk about it as othering is, it's dehumanizing. So, but this has happened, and we know that reparations are being made, and on colonialism too, and what I live in Canada. I'm from Canada. You see that it's still I don't mean to start a firestorm here, but it's still not enough unless you're able to address the actual system in some meaningful way, which deprives people of their land and right. So I think about systems. Maybe I can give another example. And again, this is going to sound so broad, Angie, and I apologize for that. It's just, I know we have limited time, but deinstitutionalization, I would like to break down institutionalization in so many ways. Why? Because it deprives people of their freedom. And an example of that, we can look within, I know that there's people from other countries here, but within Canada, very well documented examples during COVID, at least the first 2 years of COVID, and ongoing. COVID will always be with us, but the lack of care in long-term care homes, in quotation marks, in Canada, to a large extent was just deplorable, and we know this. And when I look also for look at people who have disabilities, same as that. What's called a home. A home is a place that, what I call a home, where you have freedom, you have the support that you need, but you also have the freedom of choice. And if you require supported decision making, then you have that. But I think we also need to learn how to be better friends to one another. Incarceration would be another system under the category of institutionalization. And there's lots of ways to come in on that. Yeah. But I come in on what happens when people that have been incarcerated are released and told something like, well, here's a place for you to stay. It's crap, but it's for you to stay. It's not safe either. And here's a place that maybe you could work, but everyone's going to know that you've been in a correctional facility. So good luck with that. And here's who will come and visit you, but that's to make sure that you're not breaking any rules. And then we look around and say, gosh, look at the recidivism rate in wherever it is. And I'm thinking, what choice, real choice, did that person have in terms of finding home, community, belonging, than to go back into the system. And I write about someone in my book whom I got to interview that was part of the Inside Out prison exchange program, and he describes how he intentionally reoffended to intentionally get caught, because he knew that was his only hope, having found where he wanted to serve his next sentence, to turn his life around, which he did. So that's, I guess, what's the tip of the iceberg, but hopefully that gives a sense of what I'm talking about.
Yeah, yes. Oh my gosh, we're on fire here. No pun intended. In terms of our questions and our comments, I love it. Thank you, everybody. I want to highlight about oh shoot, where did it go? They're coming in and I had it sitting there. Oh, I know about Shirley talks about the link between social connectedness and the sense of belonging and mental health. And we know that post-COVID, mental health is on the rise, especially in rural communities and men in rural communities. And so, and another comment was that belonging is just not an important in people's work, in government and in the systems, right? And so how do we make belonging essential, I think, is maybe the question. Yeah. Well, if everyone on this call would work with me and me with you, I bet we could come up with a few things. And I'm actually serious about that, is that this is something that involves a lot of people committed around. You don't have to be committed to reading my book. You don't have to be committed to the Samuel Center for Social Connectedness, or even to what I'm talking about today, but I hope you will. But here's the thing, is that we all know inside ourselves what this is. And so I think that the underlying question to all of this is if it matters, why does it not seem to matter enough? Mm. And I totally agree about the I'm not sure if it was a question or more like, it sounded more like Shirley, yes, we're speaking the same language. Yeah. Okay. About social connectedness and belonging. But I think that one of the areas, and I'm not sure I don't know who's on except the people whose names I'm seeing. How do we get this into workplace cultures? Big thing. And also, how do we get this into not only people who work in government, because those are workplace cultures, but into policy, and not have it be where belonging or there's kind of a vocab, right? My vocabulary begins with belonging, but it can be about inclusion, and it can be empathy comes in, and seeing the other, and a lot of the things that I know Tamarack is already doing and about is that I think that with policy, I don't think there's going to be, here's the belonging part of government. It's the same way that the right to belong is not meant to suggest that there should be another declaration in the UN, although I certainly wouldn't mind it, but more that the right to belong is a way of lifting up a lot of other neglected rights, and I think we could actually pick any of them, and at the same time to bring in belonging to policy. It would be to do things like, let's look at housing, let's look at why all around the world. And I gave an example in the book of Grenfell Tower in the UK about social housing getting the cheapest cladding. And as I'm not a builder, so forgive me if there's any builders on there, but as I understand, it's a coating on the building, and they use the cheap kind, and they used the cheap kind in the building caught on fire, and a lot of people died, and the rest were left homeless several years ago. And I think about that the way I think about COVID, and the way I think about when I get asked about, well, why, you asked so nicely, Heather, why did I write this book? But I also get a question that goes, why did you write this book? I mean, we all know, right? After COVID, we all know. And I'm saying, yeah, how do you think things have improved?
What systems and structures do you think have improved? What awareness do you think is better? And so that's when I think about policy too, including workplace policies, that they have to be made by the people who work there. It's not like, I can't stand when some places have rules for a meeting on the wall. It's like, it's not about what we want to know, is about what does it mean to support each other in community wherever we are. And I know that there's a lot of people on this call that will have answers in their particular field or their family or whatever that is, but it's almost like, I know this sounds funny, but you know, when your alarm goes in the morning and sometimes you can have a really loud one, I can't handle that. And you're like, oh, you're sort of jolted out of bed, but then you can't think straight for a minute. I feel like my work is really, in the end, it's about a wake-up call. A gentle but persistent alarm that goes off to remind us about what we forgot, because I really do believe that we already know.
We do, yes. I want to take us to Lucy's comment, and this is near and dear to my heart too, is ownership. That sense of ownership about community and how that fits in with belonging. And I personally think that if you feel like you are part of the solution and contribute to your community, it gives you that sense of ownership, which does lead to belonging. And as I said back in my introduction, I worked hard. I joined committees and I was part of my community. And so I was building that. I now actually, after reading Lucy's comment, I was like, I was building this sense of ownership, which then ultimately led to the belonging. But what do you think?
Well, I actually, I think you answered it really, really well. But I would say maybe just one other thing to add is, along with that ownership, that's really important. It's also that to feel that it's being recognized and that you're really being heard, not just getting a seat at the table. And I always think about everyone. I don't mean that this is going to come out funny, not that who's not on this call, like they have to be on this. I don't mean that, but all the people that don't feel like they belong even enough to show up at something. And I think about, I don't know if bridge is the right word, Heather, but I think that we could all be, until there's a better word there, a bridge. You've learned a lot. I feel like I've learned a lot too. And that those of us that don't feel, oh my gosh, if you go to someone literally who's at the back of the room, not talking to anyone, that they may say, oh, piss off, I'm going to call, like that's why I'm here. And that you're not hurt by that, to take a chance. Because I think about back to my father too. Why did really good people kind of pull away? And I thought they were afraid to take a chance. They thought that they were going to, that's all I could come up with. They thought that they were going to get it wrong somehow. And so they didn't try. So I don't know what you think about that, but I think there is something about when there is already a community of belonging. And now this could be, for example, for new Canadians, if you go to a community that already has that sense of belonging and cohesiveness, it's a lot easier to be new. And if it doesn't have that, it can be really hard to be new. Maybe that would be something to look into, an idea with Tamarack, because you have so many amazing people, amazing vibrant communities. It might be something to do. Maybe we could do it together, but to take all the learnings that people have already had and share them. Yeah.
I think so. I think there'll be something coming out of this, some magic writing or pulling together. I want to go to John. I was purposely saving John's question to last, and it's I think Uzma, UZMA. I'm sorry if I'm saying it wrong. But I also want to bring this into the conversation because they said that they did what I had done and, sat at the tables, but it was tokenistic. And John's question is talking about inclusion as part of belonging and how important inclusion is in belonging. So what do you think, Kim?
Well, it's essential. It's absolutely, I bet John knows that too. So John, thank you for giving me the prompt for this. Yeah, and I guess it goes back to what do we mean by inclusion? Because if you're given a seat at the table, even if it looks like you really have a seat at the table, it could really be more like the kids game where someone removes your seat only and you can't get, but there, what I mean is we all know, right? No one needs to tell us when you're included, but not really being included. So I think like wherever that line is, you may not know where the line is, but you know it as soon as it's been crossed. So I would say, well before a gathering or a meeting takes place is to figure out what inclusion is going to mean. And if somebody, for example, is new, then, or I'll give you an onboarding example. I think that in terms of the workplace, that onboarding, it shouldn't just be there as kind of a policy thing or meet your colleagues, or this is, you have to sign the thing to say you know the rules. I think that onboarding could go on indefinitely and call it something else. And with mentorship and with total safe space, that would be an example of real inclusion. Also is when you don't just get, thank you very much, Heather, that was very important, and absolutely will incorporate that, and you never hear anything again. That's not inclusion. And it's not that everyone's idea gets to be taken up, but I also, or picked up, I should say. But I also think that if someone's in a conversation or cares about this stuff, you someone, the gathering, the whoever, there's like a vertical structure, which unfortunately we still have so many vertical structures of everything in society, that is able to say, this isn't about where you are in the organization. Mm-hmm. We're here to solve a problem. We're here to address something. And we're working together as a group. And I would love help so much as to how to put language, because language is really important, right? As is listening, but to put language around this that kind of makes belonging inclusive, not just as a side thing in any kind of dialogue or goal.
Yeah. There's a piece of John's question I left out, because it goes to this, I talked to you, Kim, about this equation, definition of belonging in equation. Yeah. And the other part of John's question was, people have to be seen, heard, and valued. And so I was on a belonging webinar a couple of years ago, and this stuck with me, and I call it the belonging equation. So belonging equals known plus noticed plus missed, which is that seen, heard, and valued. So you know them, you notice if they're missing, you notice if they have something to say, you notice. And if they don't come, oh wow, I really miss them. I missed Heather, or I miss Kim, or I miss John. And so just wrapping up here, there's those of us on the call. I'm going to challenge you, because we talk about the solutions going forward. I'm going to challenge you that it is the 60 of us on this call, that when we host meetings and gatherings, that we know the people, we notice them, we miss them. Being authentic is really important. Having gone through the struggle of belonging, I work hard on creating that sense of belonging. And so if you are leading meetings, if you are bringing people together, it's your responsibility to create that sense of belonging for those folks. And one of the ways is, most of the times we introduce ourselves as Heather Keam, Associate Director of Tamarack Institute. How divided is that? I now introduce myself as Heather Keam, a mom, a wife of 3 teenage boys, and a country gal. I've lived in the rural community my entire life. That creates a level playing field, because it makes us human. And I don't even go to that professional piece. The other part is this listening to understand, not listening to convince or try to change somebody, but listening to understand. In the chat box was a lot about individualism, so the isms, and that going, like, we're an individual society right now. So how do we be from individual to the greater good for all? And creating our meetings, our projects or activities for the greater good of all. And then really working on making belonging just as valuable as data, just as belonging, just as valuable as funds.
More valuable.
More valuable. And so there's one question we didn't get to, which was how does belonging relate to economic inequalities in your eyes? And I think, Kim, what we'll do is we'll think about this, and we will respond in a post email that everybody's going to get the recording of this beautiful conversation.
Great question, by the way.
And a summary of the chat box, because I really think that you and I didn't answer what's next. The chat box did. And so we will harvest the chat box and include it in a post email also. And this is a beginning of a conversation, as Kim said, about Tamarack Institute and the work that Kim's doing. We're going to see what we can do to make belonging essential and the cornerstone of all of our work. So thank you so much, everybody.
Oh, can I say thank you too?
Yes.
And also, can I see the chat box after? Because I can't. I mean, I can see that there's probably some amazing things in there. I just wanted to say, Heather, this has been the loveliest and only fireside chat I've ever had. But it's not only the fireplaces. I love this. This is what it's about, right? I feel very welcomed in, and even by the many people that I can't see. And I speak on behalf of my colleagues at the Samuel Center for Social Connectedness, and I see Laura here from the Samuel Family Foundation, and also anyone who wants to keep the conversation going. Let's do it. I'm in, and thank you so much.
Thank you. And it's again being authentic. This little detail, these are images that we found about our fireplace. And so, just being authentic and making it feel warm and inviting. And I'm going to leave you with, why have a meeting when you can have a party? Thanks, everybody.